So Keith, tell me what happened on Monday morning.
So earlier this month, we had a situation in the office where a client had a significant homeowner loss. And it came from an extremely unlikely source, not something we could ever even dream about. It was very odd. Client had one of those glass bulb watering devices that goes into, you kind of put it, you fill it up with water, you put it in the dirt in the planter, and it kind of slowly waters your plant. And so this glass bulb planter was situated next to a window, logical place where you put your plants. And so this window was collecting sunlight, and the sunlight was hitting this glass bulb and heating it up, and then it dried out, and it got so hot that it actually heated up the soil that was in the pot, and it combusted, and it was near other things inside the house, couches, furniture, what have you, and it literally started a significant fire, and the homeowner was not home, and it created a devastating situation, a devastating fire, and the neighbors saw the fire and called the fire department, and this house sustained severe damage. Fortunately, nobody was home, no pets were home, but the fire loss is significant, and there's a lot of property damage, and it has created, of course, when you have a property loss like this, a massive inconvenience for a homeowner to be displaced from their home for an extended period of time. So that is, again, a very unlikely source and not something we could have even dreamed about.
Yeah, that's truly devastating. What is the, you said that the total loss estimate was around $600,000?
You know, when you start adding up damage to a property, when you think about a significant fire for an average size home, and you think about all of your contents, your personal property that's in there. So you've either lost all your clothing, all your furniture, your towels in your bathroom, your flatware, stuff you have in storage, what have you, all these personal items. And then you have the expense, the monthly expense for you to go live somewhere else to try to maintain as best you can your current life, the expense of that, what we call loss of use, for you to go live in a hotel if they have to bring a trailer unit to the property for you to live at so you can kind of oversee construction. All these additional living expenses that you have outside of this situation, they add up to a very significant amount of loss. The total loss is huge. And so it's not only the value of your house, it could be the value of all your contents and all the expenses related to you having to be displaced from your house for that extended period of time. How long does it take to build a house these days in New England? So even with our winters, at times challenging weather, it's really expected that you could probably build a house sometime between maybe 6 and 12 months. And that's what that coverage for loss of use, being displaced from your house, generally speaking, insurance companies give you that 12 months worth of expense. So it's very likely that, you know, an average home, I'm not even sure at the moment what an average value might be these days. It's, you know, probably 10 years we might have said 250, 300, maybe it's more 450 plus or minus. You know, when you add your contents to that and the loss of use, it could be easily over $500,000 to get folks back in the position that they were in pre-loss.
You know, this event was kind of like a freak accident. Is there steps that other people can take to avoid something like this? Is this even avoidable? Was it really just I've never heard of a story like this with these glass bulbs. These things have been around for years.
Yeah, ironically, we did hear of another situation that was related to this kind of loss, and it involved one of these glass bulbs, but it was slightly different. Sunlight came through the window, was magnified, almost like a magnifying glass, the beam of sunlight went through the glass bulb and it hit a couch, and it burned the couch, and the couch is what started to catch on fire. In that situation, the homeowner was actually home and was able to smell something and extinguish it, but again, equally as shocking to the homeowner that was the source. In this particular situation, prevention, how do you prevent this kind of thing from happening again? Just short of saying, if you have one of those glass bulbs, throw it out, get rid of it. You see them everywhere. You see them in, home stores. You see them in, a plant shrub place, nursery, whatever. You see them on online for sale at large online retailers. And where do they come from? Maybe some are made here domestically. Maybe they're made in foreign countries. And the trouble with these things is you probably can't determine where it's from. There's probably no maker's mark on it, so there is no real even source of recovery from the other party. So in terms of prevention, I would say if you have one, toss it in the trash.
Yeah.
And just be aware that it's actually a thing. Otherwise, prevention-wise, how do you? Maybe you just, if you have them and you love it and you're not going to toss it in the trash, then maybe it's not near a window. But hey, plants need to be, generally speaking, need the sunlight. So it's probably one of those things where maybe just get a watering can instead and just toss the bulb watering plant thing. Yeah, get rid of it.
Yeah, a little old school. When we're talking about house fires in general, what do you mostly see at Fortified? What are the most common claims when it comes to fire?
When it comes to severe, large homeowners fires, these are not something that we see on a regular basis. There might have been years that passed in the agency that we might not have even seen a fire. I don't know what the rhyme or reason is, but over the past several years, it seems like fires have been, home fires, multifamily fires have been more prevalent with regard to what we've seen in our agency. There's probably a few common causes that we've seen that might not be the same causes that might happen countrywide, for example, but we're in New Hampshire. Our agency writes in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and we have cold weather in the winters, and a lot of folks may use what we call secondary heating systems, whether it's a fireplace, whether it's a wood stove, a pellet stove, secondary gas stoves, which are the safest type of thing. But we certainly see fires as a result of items being placed too close to these secondary heating sources. So wood stove, probably most commonly, where you have, let's say, the wood that you're going to put into the wood stove, the fire starting, the newspaper that you might start the fire in the wood stove with, those things being left too close to a wood stove. Once the wood stove gets warm and cranking, those things combust, start a fire. Also, people place furniture too close to those items, or they might have a fireplace with an open front, an open area where cinders can come out of the ash can come out of the fireplace. A piece of wood pops and ash flips onto a carpet that's close to the front of a wood stove or close to the front of a fireplace, and it literally burns the floor, or a rug. You should have a certain amount of distance between the front of a wood stove and your carpet, for example. There should be a fire safe type mat that's in front of the apparatus, so that you're not, if those sparks or ashes or cinders come out of the fireplace or wood stove. They're not catching on fire and starting a fire. So secondary heating is certainly something. Probably the next most common thing that we see that for fires is unattended cooking. And I think all of us to some degree may be guilty of that. And by that I mean you have a pot of some sort, a pan on the oven. It is either heating up for pre-cook, getting it warm pre-cooking, or you've got something in the pan and you leave it. Whatever's in the pan, oil, for example, or something that's in the pan just ends up getting so hot that it just kind of burns out, or it flips something out of the pan to cause a fire. That unattended cooking, and then you come back to the cooking, and then there's a full-blown fire going at that point. And at that point, you may be in a situation where there's no other option for you to, the only option is to really get out of the house.
Yeah.
Unattended cooking is very, very common, and also a fairly common thing for parents with younger kids is unattended or non-supervised kids starting to cook and being involved in a fire situation as well. And so having some sort of parental control, so to speak, on
I've never even thought about that.
Having younger kids cook is certainly a thing, and we've seen several fires in our history that were the result of, I'll say, younger kids cooking unattended, and things get out of control, and they don't necessarily know how to handle a cooking fire.
Yeah. What about candles? Should I worry about my wife's candles?
Yeah, you should. It's historically speaking, and I'll say our micro environment of our office, we haven't seen candles necessarily be a source of fires. It's probably a very common thing for a lot of folks to have these, especially these ones that smell so great and making this house smell good, and also forgetting about them. Maybe the way a lot of them are made these days, they're in glass, jars, so to speak, and but we haven't seen a whole lot of activity related to candles. What we do, if we think about those smaller flame situations, if I could, just kind of jump off of that and say that probably the next thing that we see is improperly discarded smoking materials. And we see that more with...
and this would be like a cigarette?
Yeah, exactly. So we don't see that situation quite as much with individual single-family home properties. We see that more with multi-family properties, 2, 3, 4, 5 family dwellings. And one of the situations that we've seen in the past few years is a property had a can to dispose of smoking materials on the outside. It was on a porch. Breezy day, wind came up, cigarette material was still smoking in this pail, leaves blown around, and it's literally started a fire on the porch. And once it was noticed by neighbors and homeowners, it was fully involved, and another significant amount of damage, to a structure, to a building, approaching $1 million worth of loss. When you think about a multifamily and you have multiple units displaced, you have loss of income from renters because nobody can live there. You have extreme repair costs. And coming out of the pandemic, there's just, and just in general with property there's such a significant increase in building materials, sourcing building materials, and labor, finding the contractors to actually do the work. The costs are just, we could argue about it, but they're at least 50% more than they used to be, even just talking about 5 years ago. So there's significant costs, but we never want to discount the amount of stress and angst that goes along with being displaced from a property. It is a really challenging time for people who own properties to be displaced from their homes. It's especially folks with children. If you have pets, if you have a certain property to take care of that's there, if you are caring for other family members at your property, it is really challenging when we start to look at the time and effort and just the amount of stress of missing time from work or having to coordinate with contractors, find new contractors. It is a real no joy situation. Nobody wants a fire loss, and so any homeowner's claim is challenging. They are just, the most common claim that most folks are going to be involved in is something with a vehicle, and the process for vehicle stuff, it happens. You can get that done pretty quickly, and they're very easily managed. But cars are pretty uniform, and things are pretty standardized. And your home is not. Every home is different. It's very custom, and it is really challenging. And so there's not uniform ways to fix things. Everything's custom, and so it creates a lot more difficulty to get a claim resolved. It does not happen with the same speed as something like an auto claim. But I'd say probably the last, most relevant fire cause that we see is properties with outdated electrical systems. Most of the modern homes that you're encountering or seeing that we see, in order to be insured, they have to be updated. They have to have what we call as circuit breaker electrical systems in the home. If we go back the 70s, 60s, you had fuses. They could be screw-in type fuses, and each fuse has a certain amount of amps it's able to handle. And then prior to that, homes had electrical systems with what's called knob and tube wiring. And believe it or not, that knob and tube wiring was around since the early 1900s, and some of that stuff is still sitting around active in properties. And so in order to qualify for insurance, we have to make sure that those electrical systems are no longer present, or at least there's no evidence of those electrical systems, and they have to have, on average, typically a 100 amp electrical system with a circuit breaker. But there are properties out there, literally today, that have functioning active knob and tube wiring, and this stuff is just not safe. It's exposed wire. The wire can arc and can start a fire. And so sometimes you'll see older properties on the news. They typically end up almost looking like multifamilies, or you'll hear them say the multifamily properties, and there was some kind of electrical issue. And a lot of these may be the result of having one of these antiquated electrical systems that cause fires. But overall, I'd say those were probably the most common ones that we see in the agency over the past 20 years.
Great. So I just bought a house this year. My wife and I bought a house, and we do have.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we do have a home. We do have home insurance. But what are some things? I mean, after this conversation, now I'm thinking about what kind of coverage we have. What kind of steps or resources could I access in order to make sure that I'm protected?
Well, most everybody is protected with a fairly uniform or a standard homeowners policy. And the standard homeowners policy, we could call it an HO3 as far as an insurance term. And with an HO3, the policies are pretty standardized. The forms are approved to be available in the states wherever you might live. And in those forms, they're covering a relatively uniform, basic standard of perils being causes of loss. And you usually don't have to examine a policy to be looking for, hey, is that glass watering bulb thing, am I covered for that? Yeah, you're not gonna go find a cause of loss in a policy that says that glass bulb watering device is covered. You're not going to find that.
So if that did happen, I would be covered, most likely?
You would be. In a standard homeowners policy, yes.
Okay.
That cause of loss is, that's purely an accidental cause of loss. The cause of loss in that case, something has started a fire. That's a cause of loss. And that is certainly a covered peril. All of the perils that we are talking about previously to just now, whether it's cooking related, secondary heating source, electrical issue, improperly discarded smoking materials, or even the open flame thing from a candle, those are standard things that are covered by the HO3 homeowners policy that you have and that I have. Those are just standard coverages.
This has been really helpful today. Do you have any other, last piece of advice, just a takeaway message for listeners? Just short of going back over each one of these things and talking about these, I do feel very strongly about a couple important things with just if we're talking about fire still. Yeah, fire specifically.
And, you really need to make sure that you have functioning smoke detectors on every floor, have multiple smoke detectors. It's great when you have a relatively new construction and the smoke detectors are all tied in from the basement to the first floor to the second floor to your garage. You need an early warning system as best you can to protect your life and your family, and to be able, or your tenants to be able to, get out of the home if there is a fire.
Yeah.
My personal opinion and my personal, what I do personally is I have fire extinguishers on every level of my house. I have fire extinguishers in my garage. I have them on a first floor. I have them on the second floor. I have them in the basement. I have them in stairways.
I'll have to get some of those. Yeah.
Upstairs to downstairs, and then you have a proper fire extinguisher for your kitchen area. It's a different kind of fire extinguisher off the top of my head. I know they're white, and it's made to handle something on a stovetop because it expecting that it could be something that's grease related. So a traditional fire extinguisher is not the best choice for a kitchen fire. You want to have one of these white fire extinguisher.
I'll show some images on screen.
Yep.
Where do you get these? Just like, I'm sure I could get these on Amazon.
Yeah, you could source these online. You can source them from your local box store, hardware store. Will have fire extinguishers. I get ones that are probably a little bit larger, just to be conservative. One of the other important things about a fire extinguisher is it sounds really almost condescending to somebody to say, you got to know how to use it as well. I think in a panic, a lot of folks may grab a fire extinguisher and just squeeze the handle. And what some people don't realize is there is usually an aluminum pin that goes through and it's locking the fire extinguisher so that you can't squeeze the handle. You want to make sure you're pulling that pin first. If you squeeze that handle with the pin in there, you can bend the aluminum and you can't pull that pin out because you put a good amount of force and a panic on being able to get that fire extinguisher ready.
Wow.
And you want to be able to test one and spray it and actually see what it does. Don't spray it inside, obviously, but the most common thing to do is to take an older one. These fire extinguishers do have a useful life. They generally have a dial, and if it's in the green, you're good, and if it's in the red, it's no good. There's propellant and there's chemical inside, and you want to be able to make sure that is actually going to work. And so if you have a 20-year-old fire extinguisher, it may not work. They do have a useful life, and you want to be able to, if you do have one that's approaching and older, that was one that you could test the use of that and give it a spray before it gets tossed out, and you may determine or see that it doesn't spray very much or hardly anything at all. But at least you might get a feel for something in the event you need it. There's also a good variety of other things you could use. For example, in a kitchen fire, there's a lot of new products that you could purchase that might be a blanket that you throw over. You just toss the blanket over your kitchen fire, or something that's starting to combust. I guess in terms of basic last tips regarding fire, those are the things that. And one more obvious thing is, it seems corny, right? You did it as a kid probably at school, but you need to know what your evacuation plan is going to be and where you're going to end up if you have to move out of your property or your home really quickly in the event of a fire, and making sure that you can get out of the house and you know how to manage a lock in the dark, or if you're in a smoky situation, you got to be able to do that with your eyes closed. But obviously we want you to protect your property, but you need to protect yourselves and get out of a property, get out of the house right away, and do so efficiently and practice with your family.
Maybe I have one more question. This is personal. So we have an older furnace, and it burns oil, and it smells a little bit like oil when it uses the fuel. But I'm always thinking, since I bought the house, like, could this be a potential, maybe the heat that it gives off? I'm not sure what it would be, but that's been in the back of my mind since we bought the property. Kind of the threat of maybe it starting a fire.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
I do. I think I know a little bit about it because my property, just like yours, is an oil. I have an oil furnace, just like you do. And literally right now, this morning, I have my annual heating service is taking place this morning. And so I live, unfortunately, in a street that doesn't have the ability to have natural gas. I'm buying oil just like you, and not necessarily to prevent a fire per se is the reason that you have it serviced, but for efficiency. So oil burning boilers get dirty. It builds up soot, and when you have a buildup of soot and such in your furnace, it may not operate as efficiently as it should. So technically you could be burning more oil and it won't work as efficiently. And so you should, in my opinion, you should have eyes on your heating system every year. I do mine typically before I turn the heat on, but we've had several cold nights, and so I've been running my furnace for the past week or so. And like I said, my guy is overdoing the service right now for the boiler, and I have an oil-fired hot water heater. So he's doing service on both those items for me today. And typically, that might run you a couple, $300, $400, $500, depending on what you have for a system and who's doing the work for you. But you certainly want to have annual eyes, and typically you have a tag on your furnace that says, it was serviced on such and such a date. And you want to do that, in my opinion, every year on a regular frequency for safety purposes, not necessarily for fire, but we do have to be careful for making sure it's running efficiently so we don't have carbon monoxide issues as well. As much as I said before, we were talking about fire, and you should have almost as many as you have smoke detectors. In my opinion, you should equally have carbon monoxide detectors on every floor. Have one near your heating source in your basement, first floor where you're sleeping. Heck, I'll even put one in my garage as well. And I have two in the garage. That's a life-saving device. You are not going to smell carbon monoxide. It is, as they say, a silent killer, and making sure that your heating system is working correctly is also helping to protect your lives, as well as hopefully save you money so that your oil burning system is efficiently operating. And so service is a critical thing. Based on my personal experience, if you are smelling the oil in your house, especially on startup or when it's running or it's turning off, you need to have that serviced. It's time.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Keith.
You're welcome. Thank you.